Ravi had always been the kind of person who liked things predictable. Every morning was the same. Alarm at 6:30, exercise by 7, and by 8:15 he'd be sitting at the corner table of the coffee shop near his office. Same table, same order, same routine. His friends used to joke that you could set your watch by his schedule. And honestly, he liked it that way. After his last relationship ended 2 years ago, not with a fight or drama, but just kind of fading into nothing, he'd decided that predictable was safe. Predictable meant no surprises, no pain. He worked as an architect, drawing buildings, creating spaces, calculating every detail down to the millimeter. His life felt a lot like his work. Everything measured. Everything in its place. His younger sister Priya would roll her eyes and tell him he needed to live a little, but Ravi was content. Or at least he thought he was. That Wednesday morning started like any other. The sky was gray and heavy with rain. The kind of rain that makes you want to stay in bed, but Ravi never broke his routine. He grabbed his laptop bag and headed to the coffee shop. The place was packed. The usual morning crowd fighting for tables. The espresso machine making that loud hissing sound. People tapping away on their keyboards or scrolling through their phones. Ravi settled into his corner spot, opened his laptop and pulled up the building plans he'd been working on all week. A residential complex. Nothing exciting, but it paid the bills. He was deep into calculations, trying to figure out if they could add an extra window without messing up the structural integrity, when someone spoke. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" He looked up, ready to give his automatic polite smile and nod, and then everything just stopped. Standing there was a woman about his age, holding a sketchbook tucked under one arm and a coffee cup in the other hand. Her hair was damp from the rain, a few drops still clinging to the ends. But it was her eyes that got him. They were this warm brown color like honey held up to sunlight. And when she smiled, this apologetic little smile for interrupting him, Ravi completely forgot how to form words. His brain, which had been calculating stress loads and window placements just seconds ago, went completely blank. He just stared. After what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, he managed to nod and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Thanks so much," she said, setting down her things. "This place is crazy busy today. I'm Nina, by the way." "Ravi," he managed to say, his voice coming out a bit rougher than usual. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, Wednesday mornings are always packed." She laughed, and the sound did something weird to his chest. "Good to know. I just moved to this neighborhood a few weeks ago. Still figuring everything out." They started talking, and it was strange because Ravi wasn't usually good at small talk with strangers. But with Nina, it felt natural, easy. She told him she was a freelance illustrator working on a children's book about a kid who could talk to buildings. When she said that, Ravi perked up. "Buildings, really?" "Yeah," Nina said, her whole face lighting up. "I've always loved old architecture. The way buildings have personalities, you know? Like that old theater down on 5th Street, the one that's all boarded up. Every time I walk past it, I imagine what stories it could tell." Ravi leaned forward. "I know exactly what you mean. I'm an architect, actually. And that theater, it's from the 1920s. Art Deco details, original crown molding. It's a crime that it's just sitting there empty." For the next 40 minutes, they talked about buildings and art in the city. Nina showed him some sketches from her book, these beautiful drawings of buildings with faces and expressions. Ravi found himself telling her about projects he'd worked on, dreams he had for designs that would never get approved because they were too creative, too different. He didn't notice the time passing. Didn't notice his coffee getting cold. Didn't notice anything except Nina and the way she gestured with her hands when she got excited about something, or how she tilted her head slightly when she was really listening. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her eyes went wide. "Oh no, I'm so late. I have a meeting across town." She started gathering her things quickly, shoving her sketchbook into her bag. "This was really nice, Ravi, really nice." "Yeah, it was," he said, standing up as she did. His brain was screaming at him to ask for her number, to say something, anything to make sure he'd see her again. But his mouth wouldn't cooperate. The words got stuck somewhere between his brain and his lips. Nina gave him one more smile, that same warm smile that made his chest feel tight. And then she was weaving through the crowded coffee shop and out the door into the rain. Ravi sat back down, staring at the empty chair across from him. What just happened? He looked at his laptop screen, at the building plans he'd been working on, and realized he had no idea what he'd been doing before she showed up. His entire morning had been erased and replaced with those 40 minutes. He tried to go back to work, but it was useless. Every few minutes he'd remember something she said or the way she laughed, and he'd lose his train of thought completely. By the time he got to the office, he was in a daze. His colleague Arjun noticed immediately. "You okay, man? You look weird." "I'm fine," Ravi said, but he wasn't fine. He was the opposite of fine. He was completely off balance, like someone had tilted his carefully ordered world on its axis. At lunch, he couldn't eat. At his desk, he drew the same wall elevation 3 times before Arjun pointed it out. "Dude, you already did that. What's going on with you?" Ravi wanted to explain, but how could he? How could he tell Arjun that he'd met someone for 40 minutes and it had felt like his entire life had been leading up to that conversation? It sounded crazy. It was crazy. That evening after work, Ravi did something he never did. He broke his routine. Instead of going home, he went back to the coffee shop. It was stupid. He knew it was stupid. But some part of him hoped that maybe, just maybe, Nina would be there. She wasn't. He ordered another coffee he didn't want and sat at a different table, feeling ridiculous. What was he doing? He was a 28-year-old man acting like a teenager with a crush. This wasn't like him. He was logical, practical, organized. He didn't believe in love at first sight or fate or any of that romantic nonsense. But as he sat there in the coffee shop, watching the rain streak down the windows, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. That morning, before Nina sat down at his table, his life had been one way. Now it was different. He was different. He went home that night and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the entire conversation in his head. The way Nina's eyes crinkled when she smiled. The passion in her voice when she talked about old buildings. The comfortable silence that had fallen between them when they were both just sipping their coffee and watching the rain. His sister Priya called around 9. "Hey, just checking in. How was your day?" "Weird," Ravi said before he could stop himself. "Weird how?" He hesitated, then found himself telling her everything. About Nina, about the conversation, about the way he couldn't get her out of his head. Priya listened without interrupting, which wasn't like her at all. When he finished, there was a pause. Then Priya said softly, "Ravi, you sound different." "In a good way. When was the last time you were excited about something that wasn't a building?" He didn't have an answer to that. "Go back tomorrow," Priya said. "Same time, same table. Maybe she'll be there." So he did. The next morning, Ravi went to the coffee shop at the same time, sat at the same corner table, and waited. Nina didn't come. He did the same thing the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, the barista was giving him sympathetic looks, and Ravi felt like the biggest fool in the city. But he couldn't stop. Because for 40 minutes on a rainy Wednesday morning, a woman with warm brown eyes and a sketchbook full of buildings had looked at him, really looked at him, and suddenly, nothing else had existed. And now that he knew what that felt like, everything else seemed pale and flat in comparison. By the second week, Ravi had become a person he didn't recognize. He was going to the coffee shop twice a day now, morning and evening, each time trying to look casual, like he just happened to be there, even though he was scanning every face that walked through the door. His heart would jump every time someone with dark hair entered, only to sink when it wasn't her. His friends started noticing the change. His buddy Karen called him out during their weekly basketball game. "Bro, you've checked your phone like 20 times in the last 10 minutes. What's going on?" Ravi tried to brush it off, but Karen wouldn't let it go. Eventually, the whole story came out. They were sitting on the court, catching their breath, and Ravi found himself explaining about Nina, about how he'd only talked to her for 40 minutes but couldn't stop thinking about her. Karen listened, then started laughing. Not mean laughing, but that knowing kind of laugh. "Man, you're in deep. Over a girl you met once? That's wild." "I know it's crazy," Ravi said, running his hand through his hair. "I'm an architect. I deal with facts, measurements, concrete things. This doesn't make sense." "Love doesn't make sense, brother," Karen said, clapping him on the shoulder. "But also, maybe you're building this up too much in your head. You had one good conversation. That's it." Karan's words stuck with Ravi. Was he making too much of this? Creating some fantasy based on 40 minutes? He was a rational person. He knew that people don't fall for someone based on a single conversation. That's movie stuff, not real life. He tried to convince himself of this, tried to be logical about it, But then he'd remember the way Nina's face lit up when she talked about her book, or how naturally they'd fallen into conversation, and all his logic would crumble. On Monday of the third week, something happened that made everything worse. Ravi was walking to his office when he saw someone with Nina's hair and build walking about half a block ahead. His heart started racing. He quickened his pace, trying to catch up without running, which would look insane. He got closer, opened his mouth to call out, and the woman turned around. It wasn't her. Not even close. The woman gave him a weird look and hurried away. Ravi stood there on the sidewalk feeling like a complete stalker. What was he doing? This was getting out of hand. That evening, his sister Priya came over with dinner. She took one look at him and shook her head. "You look terrible. When's the last time you slept properly?" "I'm fine," Ravi lied, but Priya wasn't buying it. She set down the food containers and sat across from him at his small dining table. "This is about that girl, isn't it? The one from the coffee shop?" Ravi nodded, feeling pathetic. "I can't stop thinking about her. It's been 3 weeks, Priya. 3 weeks and I still—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Priya was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "Ravi, maybe you need to let this go. I know it felt special, but you can't put your life on hold for someone you might never see again." Deep down, Ravi knew she was right. He'd been neglecting work, losing sleep, turning down invitations from friends, all for a woman he'd talked to once. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't normal. That night, lying in bed, Ravi made a decision. He would stop. Stop going to the coffee shop hunting for Nina. Stop checking every face on the street. Stop replaying that conversation in his head. He would move on, get back to his normal routine, his normal life. His sister had set him up on a date for Friday. A friend of a friend named Anjali, who was nice and pretty and worked in marketing. Ravi agreed to go. Maybe that's what he needed. To meet someone new, someone available, someone real. What Ravi didn't know was that Nina was going through something eerily similar. She'd been thinking about the architect with the kind eyes and thoughtful way of speaking. She'd gone back to that coffee shop 4 times hoping to see him again. She'd even asked the barista if they knew him, describing Ravi in detail, but the barista saw hundreds of people a day and couldn't help. Nina's life was complicated right now. She'd moved to this city to start fresh after her marriage fell apart. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and she was still learning how to be alone, how to trust her own judgment again. Her ex-husband had been controlling, subtle about it at first, then overwhelming. He'd made her doubt herself, her choices, her worth. So when she'd met Ravi that morning, when they'd had that easy, natural conversation where he actually listened to her, where his eyes lit up when she talked about her work instead of dismissing it, something in her had woken up, something she thought her marriage had killed. But Nina was scared. Scared of rushing into something. Scared of making another mistake. Scared that she was reading too much into one good conversation because she was lonely and vulnerable. So even though she thought about Ravi constantly, even though she wanted to find him, she also talked herself out of it. Told herself it was better this way. Safer. Her therapist, Dr. Mehta, had been helping her work through trust issues. In their session that week, Nina mentioned the coffee shop encounter, trying to sound casual about it. "And how did this conversation make you feel?" Dr. Mehta asked. "Seen," Nina said before she could stop herself. "Like he actually saw me. Not the version of me someone wanted me to be, but actually me." Dr. Mehta nodded thoughtfully. "And that frightens you. It wasn't a question." Nina nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. "What if I'm just projecting? What if I'm so desperate to feel normal again that I'm creating something that wasn't there? Or," Dr. Mehta said gently, "what if it was real? What if you met someone who connected with you authentically? And that's exactly why it feels so unfamiliar." The question haunted Nina all week. She tried to focus on her work, on her illustrations. The children's book was coming along well. Her editor loved the direction she was taking. She should be happy, excited. But she kept drawing the same building over and over. The old theater she'd mentioned to Ravi. The one from the 1920s that he'd known all about. Her best friend Mira called on Thursday. "Okay, you've been weird for weeks, spill." Nina told her everything. About Ravi, about the conversation, about how she couldn't stop thinking about him but was too scared to try to find him. Mira listened, then said firmly, "Nina, I love you, but you're overthinking this. So what if you look for him? Worst case, you don't find him, and you're exactly where you are now. Best case, you do find him and maybe it's something good. Or worst case, I find him and he doesn't remember me, or he's married, or he was just being polite and I'm making a fool of myself, Nina countered. You're always going to find reasons not to try, Mira said. That's what fear does. But is that really how you want to live? Playing it safe forever because you're scared of getting hurt again? That night Nina couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Mira said, and what Dr. Maida had said, and underneath all her fear and overthinking, there was this small, persistent voice asking, what if? What if Ravi had felt it too? What if he was thinking about her the same way she was thinking about him? What if she let fear rob her of something that could be beautiful? On Friday morning, Nina made a decision. She would go back to the coffee shop one more time, same day of the week, same time, same table if it was available, and if Ravi wasn't there, she would let it go. Accept it as a lovely moment that wasn't meant to be anything more. She got dressed carefully, trying not to admit to herself that she was choosing her outfit with more care than usual. She grabbed her sketchbook and headed out. The coffee shop was just as crowded as it had been that first morning. Nina got her coffee and looked around. The corner table was occupied by a college student with textbooks spread everywhere. Nina felt her heart sink but found another seat near the window. She opened her sketchbook and tried to draw, but her eyes kept flicking to the door. 30 minutes passed. An hour. The college student left and Nina quickly moved to the corner table. The same one where she'd sat with Ravi. Maybe it was silly, but being in that spot made her feel closer to that morning somehow. She was so focused on her drawing, trying to distract herself from constantly watching the door, that she didn't notice when someone walked up to her table. But Ravi wasn't coming. He'd made his decision. He was moving on. That very moment he was at his office, forcing himself to focus on work, reminding himself that he had a date that evening, a fresh start. Sometimes the universe has terrible timing, or maybe sometimes the universe is just testing how much you really want something. 3 weeks had passed since Ravi decided to move on. He'd gone on that date with Anjali. She was nice, really nice, smart, funny, easy to talk to. They'd had dinner at a good restaurant. Conversation flowed well enough. But when Ravi got home that night, he realized he'd spent half the date comparing Anjali to Nina. The way Anjali laughed wasn't quite right. She didn't get excited about architecture the same way. It wasn't fair to Anjali, and Ravi knew it. He'd texted her afterward, honest enough to say he wasn't ready to date, that he had some things to figure out. Anjali had been understanding, which somehow made him feel worse. Work became his escape. Ravi threw himself into every project, staying late at the office, volunteering for extra assignments. His boss was thrilled. His sister was worried. But Ravi told himself this was better. This was productive. This was moving forward. Then on a Tuesday evening, everything changed. Ravi's boss called him into her office. We need someone to represent the firm at a community meeting tomorrow night. It's about that old theater renovation on 5th Street. I know it's last minute, but you've been doing great work lately and I think you'd be perfect for this. Ravi's heart skipped. The theater. Nina's theater. The one she'd said she walked past and imagined stories about. He tried to keep his voice steady. Yeah, I can do that. What's the meeting about? The community wants to save the building. There's talk of renovation, preserving the historical elements while making it functional again. Could be a big project for us if we handle this right. That night, Ravi couldn't sleep. He told himself his excitement was about the project. The theater was a beautiful building, the kind of restoration work he'd always wanted to do. It had nothing to do with Nina. She probably wasn't even involved in the community meeting. Why would she be? The next evening, Ravi arrived at the community center where the meeting was being held. The room was packed. Neighbors, business owners, historical preservation people, artists, all kinds of folks who cared about saving this piece of their neighborhood. Ravi found a seat in the middle section and tried to focus on the presentations. The first speaker talked about the theater's history. Built in 1924, originally a vaudeville house, later a cinema, closed in 2008. The architectural details were incredible. Art Deco flourishes, original molding, a ceiling with hand-painted stars. The second speaker discussed funding possibilities. Grants, donations, community investment. Then the organizer stood up. Now we'd like to hear from some of our local artists about incorporating art into the renovation. Please welcome Nina Sharma. Ravi's entire body went rigid. Nina walked to the front of the room, and it was her. Really her? She looked different than he remembered. more confident somehow, standing in front of all these people. She was wearing a simple blue dress and holding a folder of what looked like sketches. His heart was pounding so hard he thought people around him might hear it. Nina started speaking, her voice clear and passionate. I moved to this neighborhood a few months ago, and one of the first things I noticed was this theater. I'm an illustrator and I see stories everywhere, but this building spoke to me in a special way. It's not just bricks and mortar. It's a piece of our collective memory. She opened her folder and held up sketches. Even from where Ravi was sitting, he could see they were beautiful. Drawings of the theater restored, with art installations, with community spaces, with life breathed back into it. If we're going to save this building, Nina continued, we should make it a space for everyone, for local artists to display work, for theater groups to perform, for kids to learn about history and art. We should honor what it was while imagining what it could be. People around Ravi were nodding, murmuring approval. He was barely breathing. He wanted to stand up to say something, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He just watched Nina, taking in every detail, hardly believing she was really there. The presentation ended and people started milling around, looking at architectural drawings spread out on tables, examining Nina's sketches, talking in small groups. Ravi stood frozen in place. He should go up to her. This was his chance. But what would he say? Hey, remember me from that coffee shop 3 months ago? It sounded ridiculous even in his head. He was still debating with himself when Nina turned and their eyes met across the crowded room. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Nina's face broke into this huge, genuine smile. She said something to the person she'd been talking to and started making her way through the crowd toward him. The coffee shop architect, she said when she reached him, and Ravi felt like he could breathe again for the first time in months. I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're here, Ravi said, and he couldn't stop smiling. My firm sent me to represent us for the potential renovation project. That's amazing, Nina said, and she looked like she meant it. Did you hear what I said about the theater? I kept thinking about our conversation that morning, about what you said about the building having a story. I heard every word, Ravi said. Your sketches are incredible. The vision you have for the space, it's exactly right. They stood there grinning at each other like idiots while people moved around them. Then Nina laughed, a bit embarrassed. This is so weird, right? I've been hoping I'd run into you again, and then here you are. You have. The words came out before Ravi could filter them. Yeah, Nina admitted, looking down at her folder. I went back to that coffee shop a bunch of times, actually. I kept hoping you'd be there. Ravi felt something tight in his chest loosen. I did too. I went back for weeks. I thought maybe I'd imagined how good that conversation was, but seeing you now. It was real, Nina finished softly. They looked at each other, and in that look was all the wondering and hoping and doubting of the past 3 months. Someone bumped into Ravi, breaking the moment. They both laughed, suddenly aware they were standing in the middle of a crowded room blocking traffic. Do you want to, Ravi started, look at the architectural plans together? Nina finished. Absolutely. They spent the next 2 hours at the meeting, but really they spent it together. Looking at the building plans spread across the tables, Nina pointing out where she imagined art installations, Ravi explaining the structural challenges and possibilities. Other people came and went, asking questions, adding input, but Ravi and Nina stayed, orbiting each other, falling back into that easy conversation like no time had passed at all. When the meeting officially ended, most people left, but Ravi and Nina stayed, sitting on folding chairs with the theater plans between them. The community center staff was cleaning up around them, giving them polite looks that said they needed to leave soon. I'm starving, Nina said suddenly, checking her phone. It's almost 9. Have you eaten? Ravi hadn't. He'd been too nervous about the meeting. No, do you want to grab something? They found a small Pakistani restaurant still open a few blocks away. It was the kind of place with plastic tablecloths and mismatched chairs, but the smell coming from the kitchen was incredible. They ordered too much food, chai with extra cardamom, and sat across from each other in a corner booth. And finally, really finally, they talked. Not just about buildings and art, but about real things. Nina told him about her divorce, about why she'd moved, about learning to rebuild her life and trust herself again. Her voice shook a little when she talked about it, but she didn't look away. That morning at the coffee shop, she said, stirring her chai, I almost didn't ask to sit with you. I'd been telling myself to stay in my own bubble, not connect with people yet. But something made me ask. I'm glad you did, Ravi said. Then, because they were being honest, because this felt like a moment for truth, he added, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that day. I know that probably sounds intense, but it's true. Nina looked up at him, her eyes bright. It doesn't sound intense. I've been thinking about you too. Constantly. It kind of scared me, actually. Ravi reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. I've been playing it safe for so long, keeping everything controlled and predictable. But that morning with you, I remembered what it felt like to actually feel something. And then you were gone and I couldn't find you, and I thought maybe I'd missed my chance. You didn't miss it, Nina said softly. I'm right here. The moment hung between them, full of possibility and 3 months of wondering and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something. They talked until the restaurant owner politely told them he was closing. Then Ravi walked Nina home, and they discovered she lived only 6 blocks from his apartment. They'd been neighbors this whole time, passing on streets, shopping at the same stores, living parallel lives that were only now intersecting. Outside Nina's building, they stood on the sidewalk, neither wanting the night to end. Can I see you again? Ravi asked. Like on purpose this time? Not just hoping we randomly run into each other? Nina laughed. I would love that. How about Saturday? We could actually explore the theater building together if you want. I know someone who might be able to get us in. Saturday, Ravi agreed. Then, because he'd learned his lesson about not taking chances, he took out his phone. Can I get your number? So we can actually plan this instead of leaving it to the universe? They exchanged numbers, both smiling at how obvious and... The next 3 months felt like falling. Not the scary kind of falling, but the kind that feels like flying. Ravi and Nina fell into each other's lives so naturally it was like they'd been there all along. That first Saturday, Nina had managed to get them access to the old theater through her connection with the Historical Society. They'd spent hours walking through the dusty space, Nina taking photos and sketching, Ravi pointing out architectural details and making notes about what could be saved and what would need work. Look at this, Nina had said, standing in the center of the empty theater looking up at the ceiling. Even covered in decades of grime, you could still see the painted stars and swirling clouds. Can you imagine what this looked like when it was new? All lit up, full of people? Ravi had watched her spin slowly, taking it all in, and realized he was falling in love. Maybe he'd already been falling since that first morning. But this was the moment he knew it for certain. After that day, they started seeing each other constantly. Not in a planned, formal dating way, but just naturally weaving into each other's routines. Nina would bring her sketchbook to Ravi's office and draw while he worked late. Ravi would stop by Nina's apartment with coffee and end up staying for hours, watching her paint. They'd cook together, attempting recipes they found online and usually messing them up but laughing through it. Nina introduced Ravi to her world. Art gallery openings where he didn't understand half of what he was looking at, but loved watching Nina explain pieces with such passion. Farmers markets on Sunday mornings where she'd pick out vegetables based on their colors for still life practice. Used bookstores where she'd spend an hour browsing children's books, studying the illustrations. Ravi introduced Nina to his world, walking tours of the city's architecture, pointing out details most people never noticed. His family dinners, which were loud and warm and overwhelming in the best way. His sister Priya took to Nina immediately, pulling her aside after the first dinner to say, I don't know what you did to my brother, but he's actually happy now. Thank you. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when Nina would pull back, scared by how much she was feeling. She'd cancel plans last minute, needing space, and Ravi would lie awake wondering if he'd pushed too hard, moved too fast. There were moments when Ravi would overthink everything, get stuck in his head, go quiet when Nina needed him to talk. Their first real fight happened about 6 weeks in. Something stupid. Nina had texted she'd be 15 minutes late to dinner. She ended up being 45 minutes late, and Ravi had been sitting at the restaurant, his mind creating disasters. When she finally arrived, apologizing profusely, her phone had died. She'd gotten caught up helping a neighbor. Ravi had been cold, short with his responses. Are you angry? Nina had asked. I'm fine, Ravi had said, which they both knew meant he wasn't fine at all. The dinner had been tense. Afterward, walking home, Nina stopped. Okay, we're not doing this. We're not going to be those people who say they're fine when they're not. Talk to me, so Ravi did. He told her about how waiting, not knowing if she was okay, had sent him spiraling. About how he knew it was irrational, but he couldn't help it. And Nina told him about how his cold response had made her feel like she'd disappointed him. Reminded her of walking on eggshells in her marriage. They'd stood on the sidewalk and actually talked it through. It was uncomfortable and vulnerable and necessary. They'd both apologized, and not the fake kind, the real kind where you actually understand what you did wrong. We're going to mess up, Nina had said. Both of us. But we have to promise to actually talk about it, okay? No shutting down, no running away. Deal, Ravi had agreed, taking her hand. Learning each other's wounds and triggers was a process. Nina needed reassurance sometimes. Needed to hear that she wasn't too much, that her feelings were valid. Ravi needed patience when he got overwhelmed. Space to process before he could articulate what he was feeling. They learned. They tried. Some days were easier than others. But through it all, the theater project connected them. Ravi's firm had won the renovation contract, partly because of his genuine passion for the building, partly because of the community support that Nina had helped build. They were working on it together, officially and unofficially. Ravi designing spaces that honored the building's history, Nina coordinating with local artists to bring life back into it. The project became their baby in a way. They'd meet at the site during lunch breaks, walking through as construction progressed. Nina had secured a grant to create a community art program in the renovated space. Ravi had fought his firm to preserve original details that would have been easier to replace. "Why does this building matter so much to you?" Nina asked him one day. They were sitting on the dusty stage, eating sandwiches, surrounded by construction equipment. Ravi thought about it. "I think because it's proof that beautiful things can survive. That even when something's neglected and forgotten, it can be brought back to life. That the care someone put into creating it 100 years ago still matters today." Nina looked at him, really looked at him. "Are we still talking about the building?" Ravi met her eyes. Maybe not just the building. They'd kissed for the first time right there on